The trade outpost floated in the quiet stretch of space, far from the great colonies and cities where power and wealth decided the fate of millions. It was the kind of place where travelers arrived with small ships, where traders sold odd goods from different worlds, and where silence hid more stories than the voices of its people. Mark stepped off his shuttle and into the dusty ground of the station's main market. His boots pressed into loose gravel, and the air smelled faintly of smoke from torches and fuel. He was not a wealthy man, nor a powerful one. He lived by moving from world to world, carrying supplies, buying scrap metal, and selling what he could. Most traders worked like him. It was an honest living, but it left him alone most nights, eating simple meals in his small ship with no one to share his words. The market stretched out before him, lit with lamps hanging from ropes and poles. The stalls stood crooked, built from metal plates, wood, or even stone. Each stall carried strange things, glowing crystals, dried meats from unknown animals, bright woven cloth, or devices whose purpose he could not guess. Alien voices mixed with human ones, and the air buzzed with many languages. Mark kept his pace steady. He had learned long ago to keep his eyes open, his hands close, and his heart guarded in places like this. But that was when he heard the smallest voice. "Buy my mom, please. She will feed me, I promise." The voice was so soft he thought it was his memory at first. Then he felt a tug on his sleeve. Mark turned and saw a girl no taller than his waist. Her skin was pale blue, faintly glowing under the torchlight. Her dark eyes were wide, filled with both fear and hope. She wore a dress that looked torn at the edges, and her hands were thin, clutching his sleeve with surprising strength. For a moment, Mark thought she might be some lost beggar. But then her words repeated in his ears, and he understood. She was not asking for food. She was asking him to buy her mother. Mark froze. He had been in markets where anything could be bought: ships, weapons, strange animals, even rights to pieces of land. But never had he heard a child speak so clearly about her mother being sold. "What did you say?" Mark asked gently. The girl swallowed hard, her small voice trembling. "My mom. They have her. Please, you can buy her. She will cook for you. She is strong. She can work. Just, please. I am hungry. She cannot feed me from inside the cage." Her words struck him harder than any weapon. She was not lying. She truly believed the only way to save her mother was for someone to purchase her, like a thing in the market. Mark knelt down so his eyes met hers. "What is your name?" he asked. "Luma," she whispered. "And your mom?" "Myra." The name hung in the air. Luma's hands shook as she kept hold of him, afraid he might walk away like so many others had. Mark could see she had been turned away many times. Her eyes held the weight of too many refusals. He should have walked away. That was the smart choice. This was not his world, and the market had its own rules. Interfering meant trouble. But there was something in Luma's gaze that would not let him. Humanity was stubborn like that. When a child asked for help with such truth in her voice, ignoring her was harder than facing danger. "Where is she?" Mark asked. Luma's eyes lit up with hope. She quickly pulled his hand and guided him through the market. They passed stalls of glowing fruits, sharp blades, and broken machines. Mark felt eyes following him as he walked with the girl, but he kept his pace calm. He had been through worse, but the sense of unease grew heavier the closer they went. Finally, they reached a large tent at the edge of the market. Torches burned on both sides of the entrance. Two tall aliens with scaled skin stood guard. Inside, Mark could already hear voices bargaining loudly, naming prices, laughing as if they were trading cattle. Luma pulled his hand again, leading him inside. The air was thick, and the smell of oil and sweat filled the space. At the center, cages were lined in a circle. Inside them, Different beings sat in silence. Some looked strong, some weak, some resigned, but all had the same eyes of those who had been treated as things instead of people. And in one of those cages sat Myra. Her skin carried the same pale blue glow as Luma's, though hers was dimmer, like a fading light. She had long dark hair, tangled but still beautiful in a quiet, tired way. Her arms wrapped around her knees as if she had been sitting like that for too long. When her eyes rose and met Mark's, they were calm but filled with sorrow. "Mama," Luma whispered, pressing close to the bars. Myra's hand slowly reached through the iron, brushing her daughter's cheek. Her lips curved into the smallest smile, though pain weighed behind it. "Luma," she said softly. Then her eyes shifted to Mark. For a moment, silence stretched. Mark felt her studying him. He was just one man among many, a simple trader with no army, no wealth, no power. Yet she looked at him as if she was measuring something else: his choice, his will, his heart. The merchants noticed him at last. A large alien with gold jewelry stepped closer, his voice sharp. "Human. You look. You pay. She is rare. Her kind fetches high price. Not for beggars." Mark stayed quiet. He had walked into something larger than a simple trade. But Luma's grip on his sleeve tightened, and Myra's tired eyes stayed on him. He could not walk away. That night in the market, Mark understood one thing with absolute clarity. He had come for trade. But what he found was a plea. A child had asked him to save her mother. And he could not pretend he had not heard. The torchlight inside the merchant tent flickered against the iron cages, throwing long shadows across the ground. Mark stood still, his eyes fixed on Myra. Luma pressed her small face against the bars, whispering to her mother in words too soft for him to catch. Myra's hand rested on her daughter's cheek, her fingers trembling with weakness. Mark felt the heat of the merchant's gaze on him. The large alien with gold jewelry stepped closer, his heavy footsteps shaking the ground. His scaled skin caught the torchlight, glimmering in shades of bronze and green. He carried himself with the confidence of one who had full control of the place. "You see her," the merchant said, his voice deep and sharp. "She is not like the others. Her people are rare. They have gifts. Some call them healers, some call them lights. They can be servants, guides, protectors. This one is strong, though she looks weak now. The price is high." Mark's jaw tightened. He had seen many markets in his years of trading, but this was no trade of goods. This was the trade of lives. The sight of Myra sitting in a cage, treated as something to be sold, burned into his chest. Luma looked up at him with pleading eyes. "Please. You can take her. Please." Mark forced his voice steady. "What is the price?" The merchant laughed, a rough sound that echoed through the tent. "For you, human. Too much. You carry no great wealth. Your ship is small. But if you want her, you must pay 10,000 credits. Or more, if another bidder comes. 10,000 credits." Mark could have sold his shuttle and still fallen short of such a price. The merchant knew it. He was mocking him, daring him to step back. Myra lowered her eyes. It was as if she already expected disappointment. She had seen this game before. Buyers came, some asked questions, but none cared enough to truly risk anything for her. Her hand slipped back inside the cage, folding against her lap. But Luma did not let go of Mark's sleeve. Her grip grew tighter, her voice desperate. "You can help. Please. You are human. Humans help." Mark's heart twisted. She believed in him not because of who he was but because of what he was. Human. To her, that word meant something. He crouched down beside her. "Luma, I do not have that much money," he said softly. Her lips trembled. For a moment, She looked as if her hope would break. But then her small chin lifted, and her eyes shone with a kind of stubborn faith. Then you can find another way. Mama always says where there is no path, humans make one. The words cut deep. He thought of all the stories told across colonies about human stubbornness, about how people from Earth never gave up, even when faced with larger empires or stronger enemies. It was the one thing others feared, and sometimes admired. And now, a little girl who had nothing was asking him to prove it true. Mark rose to his feet again. "Let me see her closer," he told the merchant. The merchant smirked but waved his hand. "Look all you want. You will still need the credits." Mark stepped to the bars, his hands brushing against the cold iron. Myra lifted her eyes again, meeting his gaze. For a long moment, neither spoke. Her face was calm, but her silence carried questions. Why was he here? Why did her daughter cling to him? Was he just another who would pretend to care and then walk away? Mark leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I cannot buy you. But I will not leave you here. Do you trust me?" Myra's eyes widened slightly. She studied him, searching for truth. Finally, she gave the faintest nod, so small it was barely seen. It was not full trust, but it was a beginning. The merchant clapped his hands, breaking the silence. "Enough. If you want her, return with money. If not, leave. Others will come soon. Stronger men. Richer men. They know her value." Mark turned away, but not toward the exit. Instead, he glanced at the rows of cages, at the other beings trapped inside. Some looked at him with dull eyes, some with quiet hope. It was a heavy sight. He forced himself to keep walking, leading Luma by the hand until they stepped out into the night air. The market outside was alive with noise. Traders shouted prices, buyers argued, and strange music played from a corner stall. The torches swayed in the wind, their smoke rising into the starry sky. But Mark barely noticed any of it. His thoughts stayed with Myra, locked behind bars. Luma tugged at his arm, her voice small. "You will not leave her, right?" Mark crouched again, meeting her eyes. "No, I will not leave her." Her face brightened with relief. She believed him completely, and that trust weighed heavy on him. He had made a promise without speaking the word. They walked together toward the quieter side of the market, where his shuttle waited. Along the way, Luma explained in her own words what had happened. Her people once lived on a peaceful world far from this outpost. But raiders had come, breaking their villages, capturing many, and selling them into markets like this one. Myra had hidden Luma during the attack, but both had been caught in the end. "Why did they not take you too?" Mark asked. "They tried," Luma whispered. "But Mama told them I was too small, not worth food. She said I was weak, so they let me run around. They think I am nothing. But I am not nothing. I found you." Her voice grew proud at the last words. Mark felt something stir in his chest again. She was right. She had found him, and now her mother's fate rested in his hands. When they reached his shuttle, he lifted her inside. She sat in the co-pilot seat, her small legs dangling. She looked around the cabin with wide eyes, touching the console with wonder. Mark settled into the pilot seat, staring at the market lights through the window. He knew he could not buy Myra with credits. The price was set high to keep her locked away until the right buyer came. That meant there was only one path left. He would have to take her. The thought carried risk. If he failed, both he and Luma would suffer. If he succeeded, they would still be hunted. But when he remembered Myra's eyes in the cage and Luma's hand on his sleeve, he knew he could not turn away. Mark leaned back in his seat, his mind already building a plan. He would need timing, distraction, and courage. More than anything, he would need to hold fast to what Luma had said: when there is no path, humans make one. That night, under the cold stars above the market outpost, Mark made his silent vow. He would not leave without Myra. Morning came slowly to the trade outpost. The rising sun painted the sky in soft colors of red and gold, though the market never truly slept. Merchants had worked through the night, counting their credits, feeding their guards, and preparing for another day of business. For many of them, it was simply life as usual. But for Mark, this day was not like any other. He had not slept much. Inside his small shuttle, he had sat awake, staring at the control board and listening to Luma breathe softly as she rested on the co-pilot's chair. She had finally fallen asleep after hours of whispering about her mother. She dreamed quietly, but even in sleep her hand held the edge of his jacket, as if afraid he would vanish. Mark's mind worked through possibilities. Buying Myra was not an option. 10,000 credits was far beyond his reach. Fighting openly was even worse. The merchants had guards, weapons, and the support of the entire market's law. If he made a mistake, both he and the two aliens depending on him would be lost. That left one choice. He would have to play their game, at least for a while. When the sun climbed higher, Mark stood and stretched. Luma woke and rubbed her eyes, her small voice weak but full of hope. "Today we get Mama." "Yes," Mark said. "But it will not be easy. You must be brave." "I can," she answered quickly. Her faith in him was like a fire. He had to live up to it. He took her by the hand, and together they walked back into the heart of the market. The stalls were alive with voices, the air filled with the smell of roasted meats, burning oil, and strange spices. Traders shouted over one another, and the crowd moved in waves. Mark kept his head steady, but inside, he was alert to every sound, every shadow. At last they reached the merchant's tent again. The two scaled guards stood at the entrance, their eyes glowing like polished stone. They remembered him from yesterday, but they only moved aside when the larger merchant called from within. "Human," the deep voice rumbled. "You return. Do you have credits this time?" Mark stepped forward slowly, holding himself tall. He kept his expression calm, though his heart beat faster. "I want to make a deal," he said. The merchant's wide mouth curled into a grin. "A deal? Good. I like deals. What do you offer for the woman?" "I cannot give 10,000 credits, Mark admitted, letting his tone sound almost apologetic. "But I can offer trade. Supplies. Tools. A working engine coil, fit for medium freighters. Hard to find here." The merchant laughed, and others inside the tent joined him. "You think I trade a rare one for scrap metal? Human, you are bold but foolish." Mark kept his calm. "Then test me. Let me show you what I can provide. If it is not worth your time, you lose nothing. But if it is, you gain much more than you expect." The merchant narrowed his eyes. The guards shifted slightly, watching for tricks. For a long moment, silence filled the tent, broken only by the sounds of caged beings breathing quietly. Myra sat in her cage as before, her back straight, her hands resting in her lap. She looked at Mark but said nothing. Finally, the merchant leaned forward. "You have one chance, human. Show me something rare. Something strong. Or leave and never return." Mark nodded. He had no plan to hand over his shuttle parts, not truly. But he needed to draw the merchant's attention, to make him curious. Curiosity could open small doors, and small doors were all he needed. He turned back toward Luma. She looked at him with wide eyes, uncertain. He gave her a small nod. She seemed to understand without words. "Wait here," he told the merchant. "I will bring proof." The merchant waved his hand dismissively. "Do not waste my time." Mark led Luma outside, and once they were clear of the guards, he crouched down beside her. "You did well," he whispered. "But now I need you to be braver. Do you know the paths behind the cages? The doors the guards use?" Luma nodded quickly. "Yes. There is one door behind the tent. I used to watch when they brought food for Mama. It is always locked, but I know where the key is. The big one keeps it on his belt." Mark smiled faintly. "That is what I needed to know." She blinked at him. "We are not really going to buy Mama, are we?" "No," he said softly. "But the merchant does not know that. We must keep him busy while we find the right time to act." Luma's small face grew serious. She nodded again, her determination clear. Mark returned to his shuttle with her and gathered a few broken tools, old metal pieces, and one small energy coil that barely worked. He placed them in a box and carried it back to the tent. It was not a real offer, but it was enough to hold the merchant's interest. Inside, he opened the box and showed the pieces. The merchant lifted the coil, examining it with sharp eyes. "Weak. Old. But not useless." Mark shrugged. "It is only a sample. My shuttle has more. If you want true value, I can bring the rest tomorrow." The merchant considered, rubbing his scaled chin. Myra watched silently, her eyes flicking from the coil to Mark's face. She could see the truth, even if the merchant could not. This was not about trade. This was a move in a larger game. Finally, the merchant handed the coil back. "You may return tomorrow. Bring all you have. If I am pleased, we speak of price." Mark nodded, hiding his relief. He had gained what he needed: time. Time to prepare, to find the path Luma had spoken of, and to think of how to break the chains that held Myra. As he turned to leave, he caught Myra's eyes once more. For the first time, there was a spark there, faint but real. A spark of belief. Outside, Luma whispered, "He believes you. Does that mean we win?" "Not yet," Mark answered. "But now we know where to start." They walked back toward the shuttle, blending into the noise of the market. Around them, voices rose and fell, deals were made, lives were bought and sold. But in the midst of it all, Mark held one clear thought. The merchant believed he was a fool. The guards thought he was weak. But humans had a way of turning weakness into strength, and foolishness into surprise. And when the time came, he would not bargain for Myra. He would take her. The night sky above the outpost was clear, scattered with stars that shimmered like cold fire. The market had grown quieter, though torches still burned and a few voices still bargained in the distance. The smell of smoke drifted through the air as Mark sat inside his shuttle, the small lamp above him casting a soft glow. Luma sat cross-legged on the co-pilot's chair, her eyes bright and restless. She had not stopped asking questions since they returned from the merchant's tent. "What will we do? How will we take her? The guards are strong. The cages are locked. They watch all the time. Do you have a plan?" Mark leaned back in his seat, his arms folded across his chest. His face was calm, but his thoughts moved quickly. He had spent the last hour studying what he remembered about the merchant's tent, the placement of guards, the locked doors, and the way the crowd moved. He had no army, no heavy weapons, and no money to buy freedom. All he had was his mind, his shuttle, and the faith of a little girl who believed in him completely. "Yes," he said at last. "We will need to move at night. When the crowd is smaller and the guards grow tired. The merchant believes I am returning tomorrow with supplies. That means he will not expect trouble tonight. Surprise will be our ally." Luma's face lit up, though her voice trembled with nervousness. "But the cage is locked. The key is with the big one." Mark nodded. "That is the part we must solve. You said you know the paths behind the tent. Show me." She jumped down from the chair, eager. On the floor of the shuttle, she used her finger to draw lines in the thin layer of dust. She marked the square of the tent, then added small paths behind it. Her finger moved carefully as she explained. The guards stand here and here. They bring food through this door in the back. They keep the key on the belt of the big one. But sometimes he gives it to the smaller one when he leaves. The cages are here in the middle. Mama is in this one. Mark studied the simple map. It was crude, but it gave him an idea of the layout. He pointed to the back door. If we can get inside through here, we will not need to face the whole crowd. But we still need the key. Luma frowned, thinking hard. When the big one drinks, he is slower. He goes to the fire pit sometimes. I saw him drop his belt once, but he picked it up fast. If he drops it again, her words sparked a thought in Mark's mind. Distraction. He had used it many times before in trade, when outsmarting rivals who tried to cheat him. If he could make the guard careless, the key might be within reach. You will need to help, Mark said. Her eyes widened. Me? Yes. You are small. Quick. They will not expect you to move through the crowd. While I speak to the merchant, you can slip near the guard. But you must be careful. If you are seen, we lose everything. Luma's face grew serious. She nodded without hesitation. I can do it. For Mama. Mark felt a weight in his chest. She was only a child, yet her courage was greater than many grown men he had known. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we do this together. Once we have the key, we free Myra and leave at once. My shuttle will be ready. The plan was simple, perhaps too simple, but sometimes simplicity was the best chance. That night, they waited near the edge of the market, hidden in the shadows of stacked crates. The sounds of laughter and fire cracked from the center, where merchants and guards gathered around a circle of flames. The large-scaled guard stood with his belt heavy at his side, a jug of dark liquid in his hand. His voice was loud, and his movements careless. Mark crouched beside Luma. Do you see the key? She nodded quickly. The small chain glimmered faintly in the firelight. Good. Wait for the moment. When I give the signal, you move. He rose and stepped from the shadows, carrying a small box in his hands. He walked toward the fire as if he belonged there, his steps calm, his face unreadable. The guard turned, narrowing his eyes. You again, the guard growled. Mark lifted the box slightly. A gift for the merchant. A sample of what I will bring tomorrow. I thought he might want to see more. The guard snorted but waved him toward the tent. The merchant sat inside, speaking with two other buyers. His sharp eyes turned to Mark as he entered. You return quickly, the merchant said. Do you bring treasure, or more broken pieces? Mark placed the box on the table. Inside were small tools, wires, and the broken shell of an energy pack. Useless, but shiny enough to hold attention. Not treasure. Proof that I can be trusted. Tomorrow, I bring more. The merchant lifted a tool, turning it in the light. He seemed unimpressed but curious enough to keep listening. That was all Mark needed. Outside, Luma moved like a shadow. She slipped close to the guard, her small feet silent on the dirt. The guard laughed at a joke from his companion, raising his jug to drink. As he did, the belt shifted, and the key glimmered loose for a moment. Luma darted forward, her fingers brushing against the chain. The guard shifted, almost noticing, but at that exact moment, Mark leaned closer to the merchant. There is one piece I saved. Something rare. Would you like to see it? The merchant's eyes sharpened with greed. Show me. The guard turned his head toward the table, distracted by curiosity. In that brief moment, Luma pulled the key free and slipped back into the shadows, her small chest heaving with excitement. She clutched the key tightly in her hand. Mark kept the merchant's attention for another minute, then bowed slightly. "Tomorrow, I will bring more. Tonight, I must prepare." The merchant waved him off, uninterested now. "Do not disappoint me, human." Mark left the tent calmly, his steps steady until he reached the shadows again. There, Luma rushed to him, her face glowing with triumph. She opened her hand, and the small iron key rested on her palm. "We did it," she whispered. Mark allowed himself the smallest smile. He took the key and closed her fingers around his hand. "Not yet. But we are closer." They returned to the shuttle, where the stars above seemed brighter, as if watching their silent pact. Tomorrow, they would return not as traders or beggars, but as thieves of freedom. The plan was set, and the path was clear. For the first time since he had heard Luma's voice in the market, Mark felt victory within reach. But he also knew one truth: the hardest part was still ahead. The market was alive with sound that night, but it was not the loud celebration of the day. The torches burned lower, and many traders had already left their stalls. The crowd was smaller, but the guards remained at their posts. For those locked inside cages, night was no different from day. Their chains were still heavy, and their freedom was still out of reach. Mark crouched in the shadow of a wall, his eyes fixed on the merchant's tent. Luma crouched beside him, clutching the iron key they had stolen. Her breathing was fast, but her small hands were steady. She had not once asked to turn back. "Are you ready?" Mark whispered. She nodded quickly. "Mama is waiting." Mark adjusted the strap of the small pack he carried on his back. Inside were simple tools, a rope, and a single smoke charge he had kept for emergencies. It was not much, but it might give them the seconds they needed. The path behind the tent was darker than the rest of the market. Crates and broken wood were piled along the narrow lane, and the back door stood at the far end. One guard leaned lazily against a post nearby, his head tilted forward as if he were half asleep. The other was nowhere to be seen. Mark motioned for silence, then moved slowly. His steps were quiet, his breathing even. Luma followed close, her small body almost invisible in the shadows. When they reached the door, she pressed the key into his hand. Mark slid the iron key into the lock. It turned with a soft click. For a moment, he feared the guard would stir, but the scaled alien only shifted slightly and settled back into his half-sleep. Mark pushed the door open just enough for them to slip inside. The air was heavy with the smell of oil and sweat. The cages stood in a circle as before, their bars glinting faintly in the dim light of the torches. The figures inside stirred as the door opened, their eyes reflecting hope and suspicion. Mark's gaze moved across the cages until it found Myra. She sat upright, her back against the bars, her arms wrapped around her knees. When she saw Mark and Luma step inside, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Mama," Luma whispered, running to the cage. She pressed her hands through the bars. Myra caught them quickly, pulling her daughter close. "You should not be here," Myra whispered sharply, though her voice trembled. "We have the key," Luma said proudly. "He came back. He kept his promise." Myra's eyes lifted to Mark. For a moment, silence passed between them. She had seen many lies in her life, but this was not one of them. He had risked everything to stand here. Mark crouched beside the lock and slid the key in. The iron creaked, then turned with a heavy snap. The door of the cage swung open slowly. Myra stepped out, her legs weak from days of sitting, but her posture straight and proud. She looked at Mark once more, her voice quiet. "Why? You are not of my people. Why do this?" "Because your daughter asked me," Mark answered simply. "And because no one should live in a cage." Before Myra could reply, the sound of boots echoed outside. Voices grew louder, sharp and angry. The missing guard had returned. Mark's body tensed. We move now. He pulled the smoke charge from his pack and placed it near the doorway. With a twist, the small device hissed, and thick gray smoke poured into the air. Shouts rose immediately as the guard outside coughed and called for others. Inside, the prisoners stirred with sudden hope, but Mark had no time to free them all. He grabbed Myra's arm with one hand and held Luma's with the other. Stay close. They ran toward the back door. The smoke covered them, but the sound of boots thundering against the ground grew louder. A shadow loomed in the haze the scaled guard had forced his way through. His eyes glowed faintly, and his long arms reached for them. Mark swung the metal key ring hard, striking the guard's hand. The alien hissed in pain, but Mark knew he could not fight him for long. Myra stepped forward, her pale skin glowing faintly. She raised her hands, and for a moment, light spread around her like a shield. The guard staggered back, blinded by the sudden brightness. Mark stared in shock, but Myra pulled Luma forward. Go, she commanded. They slipped past the stunned guard and out into the night. The smoke rolled behind them, and shouts rose from every corner of the market. The alarm had been raised. Mark led them through the narrow alleys, his mind racing. He knew the guards would spread fast. If they reached his shuttle quickly, they might escape before the hunters organized. But if they were caught in the open, there would be no chance. Myra stumbled once, her strength fading after using her strange gift, but Mark caught her arm and pulled her forward. Stay with me, he said firmly. Luma clung to his hand, her small legs moving as fast as they could. Her face was pale with fear, but her eyes held no doubt. She trusted him completely. The sound of pursuit echoed behind them, boots striking the dirt, voices shouting orders. The glow of torches lit the walls of the alleys as hunters closed in. Mark's lungs burned, but he refused to slow. At last, they reached the outer edge of the market where his shuttle waited, hidden behind stacks of crates. Relief surged through him, but it lasted only a second. From the shadows, two more guards stepped forward, blocking the path. Their scaled skin shone in the torchlight, and their weapons glimmered. They moved slowly, confident that the chase was over. Mark stepped in front of Myra and Luma, his fists clenched. He had no weapon strong enough to face them, but he would not let the guards take them back. One of the guards laughed, his voice deep and cruel. Human, you are foolish. Hand them over, and maybe you live. Mark's heart pounded, but he did not move. Humanity had many flaws, but surrender was not one of them. He would not walk away. Before the guards could strike, Myra stepped forward. Her glow rose again, brighter than before, though it made her tremble with weakness. The light spread in a wave, and the guards staggered, shielding their eyes. Now, she whispered. Mark seized the chance. He pulled Myra and Luma toward the shuttle, his hand slamming the hatch open. They stumbled inside, and Mark dropped into the pilot's seat. The engines roared as he powered them up, shaking the ground with their force. The guards rushed forward, but the shuttle lifted from the dirt, rising into the air. Mark gritted his teeth and pushed the thrusters hard. The outpost grew smaller below them, the torches fading into specks of light. Inside the cabin, Luma wrapped her arms around her mother, tears streaming down her cheeks. Myra held her tightly, her own eyes wet with relief. Mark's hands stayed firm on the controls, his gaze fixed on the stars ahead. They were not safe yet, the hunters would surely follow. But for this moment, they were free. The chains had been broken. The shuttle broke free of the ground and climbed into the dark sky. Below, the outpost was in chaos. Sirens echoed through the night, and torches blazed like angry fireflies. The hunters shouted in their strange tongue, their voices carried by rage. Mark's hands moved quickly over the controls, every switch and lever pressed with care and speed. Beside him, Myra sat holding Luma close. Her arms trembled with weakness, but her eyes stayed sharp. She looked at the stars ahead, as if she knew that beyond them lay a future that had been stolen from her for too long. Luma pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, but she kept peeking out at Mark. "They will follow us," she whispered. Mark nodded, his jaw tight. "I know. We have to move fast." The shuttle's engines roared louder, and the ground dropped away. The planet's curve stretched below them, its surface glowing with faint light. For a moment, it seemed they might truly escape. But then the scanners lit up with red signals. Mark's stomach sank. "They are already coming." On the screen, several fast-moving ships appeared. They were hunter craft, sleek and sharp, built for speed and capture. Their engines burned like blue fire, and they rose quickly from the surface. Myra leaned forward, her voice steady despite her weakness. "They will not stop. They will chase us until they succeed or fail." "Then let's make sure they fail," Mark said. He pushed the thrusters harder, and the shuttle sped upward, breaking through the atmosphere. The stars burst into view, endless and cold, the black sky stretching without end. But the hunter ships followed close, their trails of blue fire cutting across the void. Inside the cabin, the air was tense. Luma squeezed her mother's hand and looked at Mark. "Can we win?" Mark forced a small smile, though his heart raced. "We can run smarter than they can chase." The first volley came quickly. Bright streaks of energy flew past the shuttle, shaking it with the force of near misses. Alarms blared, warning of the danger. Mark twisted the controls, rolling the shuttle to the side. The engines groaned under the strain, but the craft held together. "Hold tight," he warned. Myra wrapped her arms tighter around Luma as the shuttle spun and swerved. Mark guided it through the fire, weaving between bursts of energy that lit up the blackness. Each second felt longer than the last, but he refused to slow down. The hunter ships closed in. One moved ahead, trying to cut them off. Another circled to the side. They were not reckless. They hunted like a pack, each move meant to trap their prey. Mark's eyes narrowed. He had seen tactics like this before in battle. The enemy was skilled, but they were not invincible. He pulled a lever, releasing small decoy flares. Bright sparks scattered into the void, tricking the nearest hunter ship into firing at empty light. The explosion flared harmlessly in the distance, buying them a few seconds. "That was close," Myra said quietly. "Too close," Mark replied. The shuttle raced toward the edge of the system, where the stars shone brighter. Mark knew he could not outfight all of them with this small vessel. He had to outthink them. On the radar, a cluster of asteroids appeared ahead. Massive stones drifted silently in the black, their surfaces sharp and cold. To most pilots, it was a death trap. But to Mark, it was a chance. He adjusted the controls, steering the shuttle toward the asteroid field. Myra's eyes widened. "You mean to hide in there?" "Not just hide," Mark said. "Lose them." The shuttle plunged into the field. Huge rocks spun slowly, some the size of mountains, others no larger than a shuttle itself. Shadows stretched across their surfaces, broken by sudden flashes of reflected starlight. The hunters followed. Their sleek ships darted through the gaps, firing bursts of light that lit the stones. Explosions sent fragments spinning, turning the field into a storm of flying debris. Mark's hands moved with steady speed. He turned the shuttle hard left, then rolled under a massive rock. A hunter ship tried to follow, but it struck a smaller stone and spun out of control before exploding in a bright flash. "That's one less," Mark muttered. But 3 more still hunted them. The shuttle shook violently as another blast struck the edge of its shield. Warning lights flared across the control panel. Mark gritted his teeth, forcing the shuttle deeper into the maze of stone. Each turn was closer than the last, each move a brush with disaster. Luma clung to Myra, but she kept her eyes on Mark. She did not cry. Instead, she whispered, "You can do it." Her faith gave him strength. Mark steered the shuttle toward a cluster of spinning rocks. He timed the movement, then cut the engines for a brief moment. The shuttle drifted silently, hidden in the shadow of a massive stone. The hunter ship streaked past, chasing where they thought he had gone. "Now," Mark whispered, reigniting the engines. The shuttle shot out from the shadow and behind the hunters. For the first time, they were the ones being tricked. He activated the small weapons the shuttle carried. Twin bursts of light shot forward, striking the rear of one hunter craft. The ship erupted in flames, breaking apart into glowing fragments. "Two down," Mark said, though he knew victory was still far away. The remaining hunters circled back with fury. They fired wildly, shaking the shuttle with near hits. Mark twisted and dodged, his mind sharp, his focus unbroken. But the ship was taking damage, and time was running out. Myra placed her hand on his shoulder. Her touch was warm despite her weakness. "I can help," she said softly. Mark glanced at her. "How?" "My light. I cannot hold it for long, but it can blind them again. You must be ready when I do." He hesitated. She was already weak. But when he saw the resolve in her eyes, he nodded. "On my signal." The hunters closed in, their weapons charging for a final strike. Mark steered the shuttle toward an open stretch of space, giving them room. The hunters followed in perfect formation, ready to finish the chase. "Now," Mark shouted. Myra rose, her body glowing with a fierce light that filled the cabin. The glow burst outward, flooding through the shuttle's windows. In the black void, it shone like a second sun. The hunters were caught in the glare. Their ship staggered, their pilots blinded for precious seconds. Mark did not waste the chance. He fired the shuttle's weapons, striking one hunter ship directly. It shattered in a blinding explosion. The other veered wildly, spinning into the side of an asteroid and breaking apart in a burst of fire. Silence filled the cabin. Only the hum of the shuttle's damaged engines remained. The hunters were gone. Myra collapsed back into her seat, pale and exhausted, but alive. Luma hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it, Mama." Mark let out a long breath and checked the controls. The shuttle was damaged, but it still flew. They had survived. For now, they were safe. But he knew the hunters would not stop forever. Somewhere beyond the stars, more waited. And if they wanted to truly be free, they would need more than escape. They would need to fight. The shuttle drifted through the stars, its engines weak but steady. The blackness of space stretched forever, silent and cold. Inside, Mark sat at the controls, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. His hands moved carefully, adjusting dials and guiding the vessel. He had flown through battle before, but never with so much at stake. Behind him, Myra lay resting with her head against the seat. Her breathing was slow, her strength nearly gone. Luma sat beside her, holding her mother's hand tightly. Though fear still lingered in her young eyes, there was also hope. Mark glanced back at them and spoke softly. "We need to find a place to land. Somewhere safe." Luma asked, "Where will we go now?" He looked out at the endless stars. "Anywhere they cannot find us." The shuttle's sensors picked up faint signals ahead. A planet appeared on the screen, green and blue, with wide oceans and bright land. It looked alive. Mark felt relief wash over him. There. That might be our chance. The shuttle entered the planet's atmosphere, its hull shaking with heat as it broke through the skies. Clouds rolled past, white and soft, until the land came into view below. Vast forests stretched like green seas, broken by mountains and rivers that glistened under the sun. It was quiet, untouched, and full of life. Mark guided the shuttle down toward a flat valley surrounded by trees. The landing was rough, the ship groaning as it touched the earth, but at last it came to rest. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the sound of the cooling engines. Mark stood slowly, his body aching. He helped Myra up, careful of her weakness, and opened the shuttle's hatch. Fresh air swept inside, warm and clean. For the first time in days, they felt the world beneath their feet. Luma stepped out first, her eyes wide with wonder. She looked at the tall trees, the bright sky, and the gentle wind. "It is beautiful," she whispered. Myra followed, leaning against Mark for support. Her face was pale, but her eyes shone as she looked around. "It feels free," she said. For a moment, they let themselves breathe, as if the weight of the chase had lifted. Birds with bright feathers flew overhead, their cries sharp and clear. Strange flowers bloomed along the ground, glowing faintly in the shade. The place felt alive, safe, and far from the hunters' reach. But Mark knew the danger was not gone. The hunters had lost the chase, yet they would return. He looked at the forest and the sky, then at Myra and Luma. He could not let them live in fear forever. That night, they made a small fire near the shuttle. Luma curled up beside her mother, her head resting against Myra's arm. Mark sat nearby, watching the flames flicker. The quiet of the valley was calming, yet his thoughts stayed sharp. Myra broke the silence. "You are thinking of them, aren't you?" Mark nodded. "They will come again. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but they will not give up." "And when they do?" she asked. "Then we fight," he answered. His voice was calm, but firm. "Not just for us. For others they may hunt. They cannot be allowed to rule by fear." Myra looked into the fire, her face lit by the glow. "They have hunted my people for so long. They take and destroy, leaving nothing but sorrow. If you stand against them, you will not stand alone. My light may be weak now, but it is not gone." Luma stirred at her mother's words and whispered, "And I will help too." Mark smiled faintly at the girl's courage. "We will need more than just the three of us. If others are out there, if anyone still resists, we must find them." The days passed. They repaired the shuttle as best as they could, gathering strength and planning their next step. Myra grew stronger little by little, though her light still flickered weakly. Luma explored the valley, laughing at the birds and chasing glowing insects in the grass. For the first time in her young life, she tasted freedom. But freedom was not enough. One morning, the quiet was broken. A shadow crossed the sky, and a low hum filled the air. Mark's eyes snapped upward. A hunter ship was descending, its sharp form cutting through the clouds. "They found us," he said quickly. Myra stood, her hand tightening around Luma's. Her eyes blazed with determination. "Then we finish this." The hunter ship landed nearby, its engines throwing dust into the air. From its hatch stepped tall figures clad in dark armor. Their eyes glowed with cold light, and their weapons gleamed. They moved with confidence, certain of their power. Mark stood before them, unarmed but unshaken. "You should have left us," he said firmly. The leader of the hunters raised his weapon. His voice was harsh and cruel. "You are nothing but prey. The woman and the child belong to us. Stand aside, human." Mark's jaw tightened. He did not move. No, the hunters raised their weapons, ready to strike. But before they could fire, Myra stepped forward. Her hand glowed faintly, her body trembling with effort. The leader laughed at the weak light. Then the glow grew brighter. Myra's light burst outward, filling the valley with a brilliance that blinded the hunters. Their weapons faltered, their eyes burned by the shine. The ground itself seemed to tremble as her power returned in one final surge. "Leave us," she said, her voice echoing with strength. Mark seized the moment. He rushed forward, grabbing a fallen branch and striking the nearest hunter. The blow cracked against the armor, forcing the figure to stumble. Luma, standing behind her mother, shouted with fierce courage, her small voice cutting through the chaos. The hunters wavered. Blinded and stunned, they turned back toward their ship. Their leader growled in frustration, but he knew they could not win here. With one last glare, they retreated, their engines roaring as the ship lifted and vanished into the sky. Silence returned to the valley. The fire of battle faded, replaced by the gentle sound of the wind. Myra collapsed to her knees, the last of her strength spent. Mark caught her before she fell, holding her close. Her body was weak, but her spirit burned brighter than ever. "They will come again," she whispered. Mark looked up at the stars. "Let them. Next time, we will be ready." Luma ran to them, hugging them both tightly. Her small voice was steady. "We are together. That is enough." Mark placed a hand on her head and smiled faintly. "It is more than enough." The three of them sat together in the valley, the stars above shining like distant fires. They had survived the chase, faced the hunters, and stood their ground. The fight was not over, but they were no longer running. For the first time, Mark felt not just like a soldier, but like something greater. He felt like a protector, a builder of hope. And as the dawn rose over the valley, he knew this was not an ending, but a beginning. A new dawn had come, not just for them, but for all who still dreamed of freedom.